everyone, welcome to a new book review of my channel, The Mental Traveler. I'm Gato, and today I will be talking about The Far Pavilions, a novel that was written by British author MMK. It's considered to be her masterpiece, and she came up with the story in part due to her own travels in India, the country of her birth, and the experiences of her ancestors who had served under the British Raj in that country. And I'm very excited to be talking about The Far Pavilions because I'd been dying to read the book for ages, and I finally bought it. And I just knew that I would like it beforehand, and now that I've read it, yeah, I was right, I loved it. And I think it's funny that because The Far Pavilions was one of those books that first caught my attention because of its title and its art cover. I thought that the picture of an Indian palace far up in the mountains, or of travelers through the snow-peaked mountains of the Himalayas, along with the title The Far Pavilions, was just so beautiful. It evoked in my mind this faraway utopic place, this paradise, and that was really my first approach to The Far Pavilions, its title. And then of course I knew I would like the story once I read what it was about. And as I said, The Far Pavilions is indeed a reference to this lost valley in the middle of the Himalayas. That's this sort of utopic paradise where there are no prejudice or judgments or social classes, which are all issues that torment the characters in The Far Pavilions. This novel, which took about 15 years to write, was first published in 1978. It was a big worldwide bestseller, and HBO's first miniseries was an adaptation of The Far Pavilions back in the 80s, which I shall also be talking about in this video. This is a historical fiction that can also be classified as a romantic epic, basically because it's really long as well. But I read it in less than a week because it really captured my attention and took my breath away. And it was just one of those novels that everything about it I loved, and the style of writing of the author really made me feel that I was one of the characters. In any case, this will be a book review without spoilers, so I hope you enjoy it. This is the story of Ashton Pelham-Martyn, also known as Ash. He is born in the middle of the 19th century in British India, and since his parents die when he's very young, Indian wet nurse is entrusted to take care of him. For several reasons that have to do with the Sepoy Rebellion of 1857, Sita ends up adopting Ashton as her son. Ash grows up believing that he's actually an Indian boy called Ashok, and because Ashton has sort of a dark coloring, black eyes and dark hair, it is easy to confuse him with another Hindu boy. And at first, Sita and Ashok travel a lot, but then they settle down in this faraway kingdom where Ash ends up working at the palace of the king. And they spend quite a lot of years there, so we get to learn a lot about what the royalty of India did in the 19th century, all the traditions and society and culture and ideas. And Ashok makes some friends and a lot of enemies, and most of them will end up having big repercussions when he's a grown man. But one day Ash has to run away from the kingdom, so he and his adoptive mother Sita run away, but then Sita dies, but not before revealing to Ashok that he's actually an English boy. Then Ashton ends up moving back to England with his relatives, where he grows up trying to adjust to the fact that he isn't Hindu, but actually a British boy, which is quite hard for him because he was perfectly content with being Ashok, Sita's boy. And once Ashton has grown up and he's a young man, he goes back to India to serve, and the book turns to him once he's back in that country. A lot of the novel focuses on the whole star-crossed lovers plot, but there are also political intrigues. There is war and a sort of philosophical and moral takes on life and the whole issue of England ruling over India and trying to prevent the Russians to take over Afghanistan during the Second Afghan War. It's a really long plot, as I said earlier, and I don't want to give anything really important away, but believe me, this story really surprised me in the best possible way. I was expecting the plot to take this sort of specific path, only to be pleasantly shocked because something completely different happened. I give The Far Pavilions a 5 out of 5 stars review because this is a masterpiece. It's one of the best novels that I've ever read, and I can honestly find no fault with it. It was beautifully written, and despite it being a very long and maybe a slightly complex plot with hundreds of characters, a lot of them with foreign names and diverse historical settings, I really recommend it. Not only does it transport your mind and your imagination into these beautiful landscapes, but also takes you to this faraway place, sort of lost in history. I don't think it's, at least in my opinion, as well known as it should be. I also love this novel because I loved all of the characters, even those that were evil, and I felt this because they were really well fleshed out. And as to the love story, I adored it, and that was what most appealed to me personally. And although I do love romance and the sort of common gentleman-like of what a man was supposed to be in other centuries, I really like the fact that MMK's male characters really struggle with putting duty before their hearts. That's something that I find refreshing, because even in those specific moments when they decide to do their duty and sacrifice their personal happiness, which is something that I wouldn't usually cheer for, in this case of the Far Pavilions, I was in agreement with all of the men's decisions. And regarding the woman, Hindu or European, I was really intrigued, wondering what most of them would have thought of this. Would they have been happy to have husbands who were sacrificing their marriages in order for the British rule over India to survive? Or would they have been more selfish in the best possible way and prefer their men to be less honorable and put them before everything? And I also recommend this book if you like history, because the author actually introduces characters that were alive during this specific time in history and during the Second Afghan War. And finally, as I said earlier, there is an adaptation of the Far Pavilions. It's quite long, but I personally think that it was quite a pretty good adaptation. It's not 100% faithful to the book, but I think I understand why they had to make the changes that they made. The miniseries starts Ben Cross as Ashton, as well as Amy Irving, Omar Sharif, Christopher Lee, Rupert Everett, John Gielgud, among many others. And I only wish that someone would do an adaptation of the Far Pavilions once again, since it's amazing and it has so much elements that would appeal to today's audiences. Because in the end, things like love and war and rebellions and politics will always appeal to us. The miniseries can be seen almost in its entirety on Dailymotion, so I've put the link to the first part of the Far Pavilions TV miniseries on the description box below, as well as links to its IMDb page and a link to the novel's Goodreads page. I hope you all enjoyed my book review of The Far Pavilions by MMK. Let me know if you've read or will read the book, and if you've watched or will see the miniseries adaptation. Thank you very much for watching this book review of The Mental Traveler. I'm Caro, and I'll be seeing you soon.